Hello again and welcome to our third video tutorial on the topic of price theory. Now, to do some recap, in part 1 we looked at an introduction to this topic and we covered some important concepts. Part 2, it looked at what a demand curve is and how we draw this demand curve. In this third part, we will look at supply and how we draw a supply curve. So please stay tuned if you want to learn more. In part 1 of our video tutorials, we identified supply as one of the crucial concepts, and we identified that supply is the quantity of goods and services that is available for consumers to purchase. This means that businesses and firms, they need to produce enough goods to meet the demand and make goods available for consumers to buy. It is therefore important to note that the quantity supplied is also determined by the price of a good. And this relationship between quantity supplied and price is known as the law of supply, which states that as the price of a good increases, the quantity supplied for that good would also increase. We could also say that as the price of a product decreases, the quantity supplied for that product would also decrease. We could then throw certain words around to describe that relationship, and we can say that the relationship between price and quantity supplied is a positive relationship. It is direct, it is the same, or it is identical. This just states that as one change occurs in price, the exact same change would occur in the quantity supplied. And just as we mentioned for demand, there are also certain factors which could affect the supply of a good. These factors which affect supply could look at price changes, where the suppliers decide they want to change their price. Natural disasters, it looks at the production of goods which need to grow and whether the growth can actually take place. New production technology, whether businesses are bringing in new production methods to improve or increase production. Production costs, trying to keep them as low as possible so that it does not affect your supply. And government regulations, whether government regulations are hindering or expanding the production of certain goods. So let's get into how we visualize supply, and we visualize it through a supply curve. Here we see two supply curves. We can see that they are both drawn from the left to the right in an upward sloping direction, and although we see a straight line and a curve, these are both supply curves, and it both illustrates that positive relationship, that as the price of a product increases, the quantity supplied for that product would also increase. So let's get into how we actually construct or how we actually draw the supply curve. On the right hand side, we see a table that has our price of our products, or different prices of our products, and the quantity supplied at each price. If we have a quick glance, we can see that as the price decreases, we see there that the quantity supplied also decreases. This illustrates that relationship between price and quantity supplied. So let's get into the drawing. We first have our y-axis and our x-axis. We put a 0 just to illustrate where y and x is 0. We then label our axes with the y-axis being price and our x-axis being quantity supplied. We then can further label our graph with the y-axis showing the different price levels from 100 to 500, and then with our levels of quantity supplied from 50 all the way to 250. We then look at the different bundles where price and quantity supplied meet. We then label that on the graph. So let's go ahead with that. We can see that at price 500, the quantity supplied is 250. So we put our figure there. We go down and we see that the price at 400, the quantity supplied would be 200. At price 300, quantity supplied will be 150. At price 200, quantity supplied will be 100. And at price 100, the quantity supplied will be 50. We then connect all the dots, and there we have our supply curve. And don't forget to label your supply curve with an S0 to illustrate that this is your first and original supply curve. A little earlier, we spoke about some factors which would affect supply. And these factors also affect and change our supply curves. There are two types of changes which would occur. The first one is a movement along the supply curve. And this change comes about when there are price changes which occur. And it moves along the same and original supply curve. We then also get a shift of your supply curve. And this change occurs when there is any other factor except price changes. So our original supply curve will shift either to the left or the right to create a new supply curve, and our price remains constant. So here we look at an example of a movement along your supply curve. On the left, you see we have already drawn our supply curve with an original supply line, and on the right hand side we are still using the same example as earlier. However, this time we are only making use of price 400 and price 200. So the business decides to sell a product at 400, and the quantity supplied for that product is 200. So we go ahead and we draw our necessary lines along the supply curve. The business then decides they want to decrease their price to 200. And at price 200, we also see a decrease in the quantity supplied to 100. We then draw our same lines to meet the supply curve, and we can see that there is therefore been a movement along our original supply curve with a decrease in price and a decrease in quantity supplied. And this relationship, or these changes, are in line with the law of supply. Look at an example of a shift of our demand curve. Now on the left we have already set our supply curve with an original supply line, and on the right hand side you will see we are using the same example as earlier. However, we've added a further column, and this is just showing one of the factors which are affecting supply other than a price change. Let's use the example of new production technology. We have now received new production technology, meaning we are able to produce more goods a lot more quickly. This would increase the supply of the good. So assuming our original price at 400, initially we are supplying 200 at that price. However, with this increase in production technology, we are able to produce more goods and supply more goods to our consumers. This would increase our supply to 300. We can then illustrate this by firstly showing our 200, or our quantity supplied, along our original supply curve, and at the exact same price to 300. Now how do we illustrate this change to 300? Well, we simply shift our supply curve to the right, and this will show this change in supply. And don't forget to label your new supply line as S1 to illustrate this change in supply. So this concludes our third video tutorial on the topic of price theory. Do not fret, we are almost there. See you soon.